This is All the Things with Michelle Wolf. So welcome to this episode of All the Things. Today I am joined with Deb Schachter, author of Body Image Inside Out. Deb, thank you for joining me. Do you want to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. My background. So I am a eating disorder and body image therapist. I've been doing that for a little over 30 years in Boston. And that's really my primary gig. I do it in a lot of different forms. I see individuals. I run a lot of groups, which is something I'm really passionate about. And something that really comes through in the book too is how important it is to do, I think, really any sort of work, but especially body image work in connection.
Yes.
And I, about 5 years ago, started writing the book that captures all the stories with one of my dear friends. We've been running workshops for over 20 years, specifically about body image. So that's really a huge passion piece for me, is just really understanding that connection, because we find so often that people, even when they we all have body images and we all have feelings. We all have bodies. We all have feelings about them. But I always find that the body image piece often is kind of the glass ceiling. Like, people get to a certain point of recovery from their eating disorders and they sort of hit a wall. And so that was really why we started doing the workshops and wrote the book.
So what inspired you particularly about this topic?
Body image specifically?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, so many things. I think I've learned, the more I wrote, the more I learned about it. But I think one of the biggest pieces, I mean, we know there's so much to say about it in terms of the culture and social media and all of those things. And the parts that I feel the most passionate about are actually happening on the much more micro level. That may be the currency, right? Is that those are the things that give us the message we want to look different or be different. But at the base of it is really, what is our experience in our unique body and our feelings and sensations in our body, and how that translates and often morphs into how we feel about our body. And that was something that I kind of knew in the work, but I think in writing the book and really thinking about the anecdotes that we wanted to use, it was so clear that there was such an important intersection between our emotional life and our body image story.
Yeah, I mean, when we talked originally, and so much of what I connect to in this book in particular, because I'm very big on psychosomatics and understanding and feeling like it's so important for us to feel what's happening in our body all the time, right? Like, because information
is happening all the time.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like that intersectionality and how you sort of married that?
Sure, absolutely. So often people talk about how they feel badly about their body and have judgments about it. And it may have been most of their, life. But rarely do people get curious about, again, the intersection between what's happening emotionally. What am I feeling in this moment? How does that feeling feel in my body? How is the emotional experience and the sensational experience, the sensations we're feeling that accompany our emotions? How does that play out? And so often what happens is, because there's spillover, because we're having big feelings and they come with big emotions, that often sort of overflows within us. And because we have this culture that tells us so often that we need to be different, there's a really easy hook into, I'm feeling something that doesn't feel good. If it now comes in the form of what my body looks like, I can make it different. Mm-hmm. I can do something to change it. So it often happens very unconsciously, and most people don't even realize that there is that much of a connection. And that's why we do so much in the book around tracking and really noticing when body image spikes, because it's so often in conjunction with some other kind of emotional event, even if it could be a crummy phone call or a date that never followed up or whatever. But those emotional experiences and the sensations that come with them so often get converted into thoughts about our body and ways of thinking that if we change it, then perhaps we would feel better.
The thing is about our body is like, it is the constant that we live with all the time. It is the thing that we have. It's our vessel that carries us. And so when we have these issues around body image, like that can just so affect our self-concept and how we carry ourselves in the world. And you can really feel trapped in that if you don't know how to sort of like work that out for yourself.
Totally, exactly. And the way that we think about it, I mean, our bodies are always changing, both in terms of, shape, size, whatever's happening in our lives, how much, all the input that and the output that's happening, and what's happening emotionally is constantly changing.
Oh,
and so to think there's all those moving parts, right? So to start to help people really track what's happening emotionally and how that impacts how we see ourselves, for most people feels like that they've had no overlap, and it feels really different to start to think about it that way. And to your point, also, you're totally right that the body's so accessible, and often these beliefs start when we're really young, and we may not even have any other tools. We're not like at 8, like, I'm going to go to a yoga class and work out my feelings about that teacher who said something mean, right? Our body's right there. And again, we may not even realize that what we're doing, but the body image is a what we call a hero or a heroine that steps in to try and help when we don't know how to manage what we're feeling. So we really see it as a protective mechanism that we didn't even know we were using. And the more we can start to track the ways that it steps in and really honor, like, oh, it's trying to help me manage that feeling about the date or the interview, or the applications to grad school.
Or even just like
of course it's getting louder.
Understanding our identity. Like when you talk about being a kid and
totally
the impact, like we have messages coming at us all the time. We have messages coming at us from people in our family, but also media and things that I think about, like my daughter and how she, she's so into YouTube and like following these certain creators. And it's so important, the things that they talk about. And it'll be something even innocent or educational. Like there's one creator that she follows that talks about anxiety, but then I can see my daughter sort of like identifying or applying that like to her life. And so you think about those things, and our bodies are, I feel like that's like when we talk about our own identity, like that's such an important place that we start to identify ourselves.
Absolutely. And we talk so much in the book about mirrors. And not just the mirrors that we look in when we get dressed in the morning or don't look in, but all the ways that we're mirrored. So for your daughter, right? So she's taking that in, and that can be, it sounds like maybe a powerful mirror in terms of learning about her anxiety or other things that may come with it. And there's also sort of this process, like you said, of like, oh, who am I relative to this person? Who should I be relative to this person? Oh, they've fixed everything. They come in a certain body. All the ways that we take that in, even maybe when we don't even realize that it's actually impacting our body image, but it is impacting how we see ourselves. And body image then becomes this way of giving us this offering to change ourselves and be more something or less something.
And I found, like in my own journey with my body, like, because I've definitely it's so interesting to me. I'm a small person. I'm 5'2". I'm like 120 pounds. Like, but there's been times like where I've gained more weight or I've lost weight, depending on, whatever's going on in my life. It's so interesting to me, the times that I've lost weight, that it's almost like people feel like they have a pass to say things to me like, oh, you need to eat. You're so skinny. You're like, as if like that. I've seen that play out so many times. And it's like, I don't know, like I might've been going through stuff and, struggle with like appetite suppression or whatever. And it's not like I wasn't aware of it, but it's just like, I've noticed that I've been on the receiving end of criticism in that way more than the times that I gained a little bit of weight. People didn't say things to me, because we're not going to say things about that. And I'm so grateful that those things happened to me at a time in my life where I had already had children, and having children changed my like perception of my body. Like I really saw my body as this, I just became in awe of it. I'm like, I just birthed children.
made babies and then birthed them.
Yes. Like, So I just became so proud of it that those messages like
Mm.
being, delivered
Mhm.
to me, I didn't really care about that. Like I didn't take them in some harsh way. But I think
Mhm.
about like, had I not been in that place within myself, like that would have been really hard criticism or potentially made me more self-conscious, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's kind of the same idea, right? What are people mirroring back to us? And I love that you sort of have that. I don't love that you have the memory, but I think it's great that you're aware of it because I mean, when I hear that, I'm thinking, who are you to them? What does it mean to them that you're too, quote unquote, too small or not eating enough? I mean, does it make them feel a certain way about their bodies? Like, I actually think it had much, I mean, I don't know who they are, but my
Sure.
guess
Yeah.
is it had less to do with your body and more probably to do with
hmm
their own feelings about theirs.
I think anytime I sort of come from the idea that anytime somebody is um, being critical in that way, it has far less to do with you than it does them. Um,
Totally.
but
Totally.
my awareness has gotten me to that point. But I mean, that happens to so many people and even just children, like children are around to witness those criticisms and things. And so they take
Absolutely.
that in. And so that just perpetuates this sort of like shame cycle about our bodies. And we've talked about last time, it goes both ways, men, women, it, there are sort of criticisms or critical messages happening all the time. Like you should look like this, and this is the ideal. And we really can personalize that in very negative ways.
Absolutely. And it's part of, again, what kind of came from the writing of the book that we weren't totally clear about till we sort of worked all this through in the exploration of it is the more that we are aware of what happens with our body image and how it gets impacted by these different factors, whether it's, media or comments or family members, the more we understand that, the more we have access to more of our inner alignment. The more that we say like, oh, that came in like that landed like that for me. Wow. Okay. That makes sense that I always felt whatever terrible on the, basketball court or, the more that we understand and can connect to our body image story, I actually think the more that we actually, to your point about developing wisdom, the more we're really able to see like, what have I taken in and what am I carrying and how does that impact how I see myself? And over time, the more we develop that insight, the more we can start to really work with, oh, this is getting louder in a way that probably isn't about this, but what
Mm-hmm.
is it hooking into or what is it telling me? And I did wonder, I was thinking when you mentioned, even being around your kids, when people make those kinds of comments, one of our big tools and muscles that we talk so much about is curiosity. Like I would be so curious if they take that in, even saying, what was that like for you? But kind of not even sort of like, oh my God, they must, like trying to mop it all up. It might be like, what did you think about what grandma said about,
hmm
that lady on the train or, it's real. I think it's really helpful to just bring curiosity to these experiences because again, so often no one talks about it and no one knows,
Yes.
people really don't have language to talk about it in a way that feels normal.
Yeah, I love that. Curiosity is like one of my pillars for life. I always say I'm a curious girl. Like it's why I
Yeah.
do what I do. Like I just have this sort of general curiosity for human behavior in general and about myself and about others. And I do think that kids in general, when they witness those conversations, for instance, dynamics that might play out or certain people in my world might just be really critical of themselves and have this sort of like shame
Mm.
about themselves and how they look. And so we'll hear them say negative things. And so, the kids will hear that and they sort of register that. And I'm not seeing them take that in negatively about themselves. It's more like they notice that about other people. Um, and then I think when things are then said to me or, somebody else, it's like, we just sort of shrug it off. Like we don't give it a lot of attention and
Hmm.
energy because it doesn't mean a whole lot. It's like for me, it
Yeah.
says more about that person that feels like they need to say the things, you know?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I think the curiosity is so helpful because we don't know how it's going to land for
Yeah.
kids, right?
hmm
And they might say, like, ooh, that felt yucky, or I thought that,
Yeah.
if someone said that to me, it would hurt my feelings, or, to sort of give them the chance to make meaning of it. It's funny. I was just thinking, I saw my PT this morning and she was telling me this story about being at a book club, and everyone in the book club, I forget which book they were reading. I think it was Come As You Are, which is a great book about women's sexuality. And she was saying that everyone in the room, they did a prompt where everyone was supposed to say something nice about themselves, and everybody was struggling. And we just had this conversation about like, why is that so hard? She's like, I'm in a room full of like all these successful, amazing women. So it sort of reminds me of that in terms of like, kids don't necessarily know, like, how do we talk to ourselves? How do we talk about ourselves? And I think it's really cool. So if you did have a friend over that was like, oh, I've gained all this weight, I look terrible or something, to be able to say like, what did you think when, Auntie said that or whatever? And then sort of, talk about that. Like, how do people talk about themselves? How do we talk about ourselves? I mean, I just think there's so much there because, again, it's all mirroring. It's happening in all these dimensions. And the more that we can kind of normalize that, and like you said, talk about how identity affects it and all of that, I think it's so important.
You said something about the stories that we tell ourselves. And I think you focus a lot on the sort of internal dialogue. Can you speak more about that?
Sure. I mean, I guess there are a couple pieces. One is that I really think of the book being internal family systems informed. I don't know if you know about internal family systems, but it's this idea that we have sort of discrete parts of ourselves that are kind of managing our lives for us, taking care of us in different ways, have different functions. And so learning more about how parts of us may be saying things about us or have beliefs about us that we don't even realize are just parts of us. So giving voice to those parts and really giving the sort of these inner dialogues. Sometimes I'll describe it as almost like when you're watching CNN and there's like the tape along the bottom with like the stock market. It's almost like that. Like there's this whole running dialogue that we see, we know it's there, but we're not even always aware of it. So starting to be in dialogue with this part of ourselves, and we say that we're sort of introducing the idea of couples therapy for you and your body image. Your body image has a lot to say. And if we can get some space from it, it really gives us this opportunity to see, going back to the curiosity, why are you so loud? Why are you so mean? Why are you coming at me this way?
I've gotten clear over the years on where did that voice come from? Because like sometimes it's not really my own. It's like implanted from people around me in my life.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, oh, and being able to identify that has been so helpful to me.
Yeah. In IFS, they call them sort of burdens that we carry from certain people's stories, and reflect, again, goes back to the mirroring. If someone said to you, when you were whatever age, like, oh, you're never going to be an athlete, that's going to like stick on like glue. Right. So starting to unpack that and be like, oh, I just made this assumption. What if I'm great at Pilates, or what if I'm great at, hiking? Like, who cares? So learning more about, like you said, these things that we've taken in that aren't even ours. Yeah. Oh, you're short, so blah, 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 or whatever. So I think starting to, and one of my favorite chapters in the book is the decoding chapter, when we really look at language and we get really curious, what language do we use? And like you said, who do we get that from?
Right? Yeah, one of my favorite things that's sort of playing out with I use my kids a lot as this example.
Yeah, that's great. I love it.
My son is, in the last year, he surpassed me in height. And then he just kind of like, he just kept going, So like I said, I'm 5'2".
It's always so cool.
It's a weird, the day yeah. I don't think I'll ever forget the day that we were eye to eye. And I was like, it's just a profound moment as a parent where you're like, wow, you're now this, like we're eye to eye. That's weird. And then he just kept growing. So now he's 5'6" and he looks down on me. And
so wild.
It is so cool. I'm enjoying it though. And he like jokingly refers to me as Shorty.
Oh
or
God,
lately it's like itty bitty. And I just think that's so cute. But my daughter, she'll be 11. She's she's the shortest one. And it's so funny, at their age, they're all about height. They're all like picking on their friends or like commenting on their friends.
Well, there's so much differential too, right?
Yes. And so she's like, she can't wait to be taller than me. but when he refers to me as Shorty, she gets to see me like say to him, I really like my height. I like being short. I'll say things like when I was growing up, my grandmother always used to say short people are cute because my grandmother was like 5'9" or 10. And for me, like every generation has gotten taller, So I'm like, you guys will be taller than me. But like I love that because she's gonna be short. Like, she'll be taller than me, but she's still gonna be short. I like that she gets to see me like really own that and I'm proud of that. I'm fine being short. I like who I am.
Totally. Yeah. It's like a reframe, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. And I love that you use them so much as examples because they're these like living, experiences especially as their bodies are changing so much and their identities are changing so much.
And I'm just so aware as a parent that, that we do have that impact on them and you want to be responsible in the way that you talk about them. Like when we talk about, I certainly sometimes I look at things and I'm like, oh, I want them to eat healthy. I noticed that, lately my daughter's been more like restrictive and she's like liking less things. And I'm like, I feel like if you're going to take things off the list of things that are approved, you need to add things because we're getting really limited here. But I never make her feel bad. Like I'm sensitive to that. And I think that's because I grew up with that kind of conditioning. So I just really am aware of that. I want to be mindful. I don't talk about weight with them. I talk about being healthy and strong. And I think I try to exemplify that in my own, like my son, he's really gotten on this kick of like, he wanted a home gym. He wants to bulk up and that comes from like his friends and soccer and stuff. But I love that he'll come over. I'll just be like sitting at my work desk and he'll come over and he'll be like, Mom, let's do a push-up. Let's do push-ups, And so like, we'll do push-up challenges together, or he's like, all right, plank challenge, and so we'll get on the floor and we'll set the timer on the phone and like see who can go the longest and for how long. And it's just like, that's been really cool. And that you can do these things with your kids, and start instilling good habits.
Well, and I hear a couple of things. I hear a playfulness too, which I think is really wonderful because this stuff can get so serious.
Yeah.
Especially as a parent, like, oh my God, if I turn right here, somehow they're going to have an eating disorder or they're going to hate themselves. And, you can't have that much power, but you also can't. There's so many factors in all of this. But I love that there's just sort of a playfulness to it. Like I could also imagine you being like, dude, we're not doing planks. We're going to do a puzzle or something. I don't know, like there's, I just hear a lot of connectedness in that and yeah, sort of a levity that I think is really great, especially around bodies.
Yeah. I can tell like, I think sometimes even if it comes from a place of love and concern, like I do sometimes worry a little bit about my daughter and her like limited food choices. Although I say that and she still eats she eats vegetables. Her favorite lunch meal is black beans. Like I can't fault her for that, but I'm just like dreading the day that she's like, I'm tired of black beans because that's like what she has all the time, I'm like, if you ever get tired of that, you need to replace that with something else.
That's
because otherwise we're just getting less and less, So.
Well, right. And again, just that curiosity, like what's that about? Is that about taste? Is that about something she heard about something, rather than like, oh my God, it means this or it means that is sort of, I think so much of parenting that's true for, but I think especially with things like this, I think if we come in really heavy, that, we're going to hit up against whatever's going on for them. So the more we can just be like, oh, that's interesting. I've noticed blah, blah, blah. What do you think of that? Let's
I'm taking that in as you're saying it. I'm like, I need to keep that levity about it because I do find myself getting worried. And I'm like, and we can, as parents, like, I think we can take a lot of that on ourselves. We think about
especially in the culture we're in when I mean, these are big issues and it's very hard. I think it's really scary. I mean, I don't have kids myself, but I have so many friends with amazing kids that are kind of the same age as yours. And it's so important and cool to be able to talk about how do we do this in a different way? How do we have these conversations that in a way that feel more inviting and more curious and compassionate even. I mean, if she heard somewhere that, fill in the blank is bad for you. All right. So let's learn more about that rather than like, no, it's not.
I
like,
do think that I think
right?
maybe that's like a generational shift that's happening in parenting where
Mm,
it was much more like parents coming at you being like, you're going
yeah.
to do this and these are my rules and you're going to follow them and you're going to eat what I put on the table and whatever. And maybe there's value to that. But I find like most of the parents that I know are much more, I'm going to use the word collaborative with their
I
kids.
love that.
Like they're actually talking to them as if they're people, not just children, like that I don't know, like I really find
Well, it's
that,
going to help them understand, right? If you come at it with
yeah,
curiosity and you're like, oh, it's
yeah,
really interesting. It seems like you've been more, and use a neutral word, maybe, just, you've shifted in some way in terms of what you enjoy. I'm really curious about that. Like, what do you make of it? Or what do you think? It's just so different. Because again, then they don't start to get that like shame bubbling, like, oh my God, I'm doing something wrong. Now I'm in
yeah,
trouble. Especially if maybe there is something happening, maybe a little bit, someone said like, fill in the blank, X makes you blah, X makes you Y, to sort of be like, oh, I guess I have this fear now of ice cream or something. Okay, let's talk about it. What are your beliefs about it? What have you heard? Just really trying to just bring that like really open curiosity. I just think it goes a long way. Obviously, as a
I
therapist,
think I
it's
needed
really
to hear
helpful
that
too.
because like
You
recently she
did.
decided she doesn't like pizza and I'm like, I mean pizza is like one of my favorite foods.
I think it'd be great to ask her, especially because God only knows what people are saying out there
Right.
about, and it may be she's like, I don't like X anymore. But like, even if you say to her, like, I'm just curious, like, is there anything you've heard about it? Or what do you think? And she might be like, a lot of people say pizza makes you, whatever, gain weight, or there's a lot of
Yeah.
cheese, or what I'm imagining, right? And then be like, here's the thing. Cheese is actually a really important protein
Mm-hmm.
and it's a different way to get it and, whatever. But I think, again, to hear more sort of how they've taken it in and what meaning they're associating with it, and then not trying to sort of erase that. Same with the body stuff. I mean, it's really hard, but
Exactly.
even if, and this is something Whitney talks a lot about with her kids is sort of, if there is something they say, to go towards it and get curious about it. It sounds like you're feeling really self-conscious about fill in the blank. Tell me more. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really hard as a
I
parent,
think in
right?
general, even, like stepping back from parenting, but just even being like a human being and like how we operate with each other, like just coming at things from that curiosity standpoint instead of
Yeah.
wanting to like sort of rush in. And, I imagine like for her, like sometimes she might feel like she's under a spotlight when I'm like starting to like dig into like, okay, well, you know, because then it's really from my own place of like concern and panic of like, oh my God, what am I going to feed her now? Because like, this is like,
Totally,
but like,
totally.
if we cannot do that and sort of just step back and go, okay, why? You know? Yeah.
Totally. Well, in IFS, how they would say it is that you're actually, if you're in a part, like you're in a, oh my God, how am I going to cook 3 dinners? Or, oh my God, is she getting an eating disorder? If you're in one of those parts, it's very hard to be neutral, right? So if you can say like, okay, I've got a part that's super freaked out about this. I'm going to put her on the chair over here. She's going to just chill. I got her. I get why she feels the way she does. Super understandable. And leading with that is not going to help me. So if I can be in a more calm, curious mindset, I'm going to actually be helping her out, but I'm going to do it from a place that's more accessible to my daughter and probably feels
Yes.
safer for
And
her. So
grounded.
our own parts, this is
Mm-hmm.
something we're actually doing a clinician training in June. And that's a big piece of what I want to be teaching is even as therapists, right? Like we have feelings when people are hating on themselves or they, are in a really stuck place, especially with body image. I think clinicians get really overwhelmed and it can feel really scary. So to help them be like, oh, I have a part that wants to make them not hate themselves, or I have a part that really believes they're beautiful, or someone's going to love them someday. That isn't actually going to be helpful, right? You need to be really in your own, what IFS would call self energy, so that you can really be like, wow, you started hating yourself at this age. Tell me more. What was going
Yeah.
on then, right? Like really just holding that space so that then they can step into it. It's a really different feeling, I think, especially with body image, because we all have feelings about it.
It's so important. I mean,
Yeah.
and as a clinician working with people one on one, it's so what I find, and I would say this to anybody, if you are like if something is being activated in you when somebody's like sharing something and you're like, you have this like desire to like want to rush in and
Break
like
up with that
help
person. They're terrible.
fix it or whatever, really like what you said. I love what you said, like putting that off to the side and just, and like recognize to create that space for them to step into versus like, it's like it's a chasing energy almost because you're like, oh, I want to chase the solution to fix this. So I find like if I'm
and
going
often
there,
then they push back, right? If
yes,
we come in strong, then their part's going to come in strong. But if we really create this space, like, oh, there's a part of you that really thinks you need to, fit in the bikini in a certain way before you go on this girls trip. Let's learn more. Who's going on the girls trip? How are you feeling about it? Right? That's so different than like, you're so crazy. You're amazing. You look beautiful. You're going to be fine. That doesn't do anything.
No, and really, I mean, I think people who are in that space, they can't even really receive that and take that in. And that's like for years, people, would say things to me like, "Oh, you're beautiful and you're this and you're that." And like I didn't have a frame of reference for that for myself because of my own trauma, because of my own story, whatever. Like it took me, and I mean, I would still probably struggle to look in the mirror and be like, "You're beautiful." But like for me, beauty is more like an essence and I can access it from there versus like an appearance thing. But that's like, I just noticed that when people are lobbing comments at you or lob compliments, if you can't receive that, it's going to fall right off.
Right. Exactly. That makes total sense. And that's what we talk so much about how, when we first kind of created this whole concept of what at the time we called the body self, which has evolved to become body image inside out, how much informs body image and how we see ourselves. It's such a multidimensional experience. Like if you're doing something you love or you're having a really peaceful morning, you're probably going to feel better about what you see than these times where all of a sudden we're like, I left the house and I felt okay today. And now I just feel awful. There's something that's happened and it's not clearly how you look. So what else has happened during the day? What kind of interactions did you have? Or is your body feeling a certain way? Or, did you get a headache or whatever?
Or hormonal.
Or hormonal. Absolutely. And then the feelings that come about that, right? So whatever it is, whether it's we have, body pain or we, are in a relationship that's really challenging or our hormones are shifting all over the place. All of those are things that we have feelings about. And it can feel so tempting to, again, redirect it. We have this whole idea of it being almost like your life is a road and you're kind of cooking along on the road. And then these big feelings start to happen. And we're like, yes, veer off here. And then you can get on this whole path of how can I change myself? We call it our rotary. How can I change myself? Is so much more compelling than thinking about the fact that your hormones are all over the place and it's really scary and frustrating. I was going to say, but if we now are on this, sort of like multi-rung like option, diet, workout, food, consult, personal trainer, like we're so far away from, what we actually were feeling, which is vulnerable, scared, mad, whatever.
And so being able to name that is so important. But also like hormones are really tricky, because you don't always know. I've done much better in life having like a tracker, so I know where I'm at in my cycle. So I can, because women especially we're ever changing. Men are much more static in their hormones every day versus us being like, we are on a journey.
And we feel it. We feel it deeply. Yeah. I just did another podcast a couple of weeks ago and she was talking about looking in the mirror when she gets out of the shower, depending on the time of the month it is, and how at least having that awareness of like, oh, I'm in the, whatever phase, that makes so much sense. It's so obvious, but thinking about having that awareness, maybe for you too with the tracker, oh, it makes sense to me. It makes sense to me that, my belly looks different than it does at other times of the month, or I feel different in my body than other times of the month, rather than just like helpful. Slapping a belief on that. Yeah.
Yes. Totally. So I used to struggle a lot with, mood swings and all the things and not really like having a frame of reference for why do I feel this way? Like I wasn't paying attention to all of that. And
we don't get taught that stuff.
No. And you really, and then, now that I'm 43 and I'm starting to sort of go through perimenopause, like my body is changing again. And so it's like, oh, why am I struggling with like brain fog or whatever, And so like
totally
getting in touch with, okay, what's going on? It's so like our hormones direct so much of our activity, how we see ourselves, how we experience the world. Um, like I feel like it's such a key part of understanding ourselves and our body.
For sure. It makes me think about, you did a great layup for me, but another muscle that we talk about is compassion, which, I think can feel sort of, I don't know, cheesy or bubble bathy or whatever. But the reality is when we're thinking like, wow, my hormones are all over the place and I have to, whatever it is, give a big presentation or have this hard conversation with my kid. If we can start to cultivate more compassion, like this feels hard.
Yeah.
That makes sense to me that I feel overwhelmed. That makes sense to me that I might even be more self-critical. How different that is. It's like when someone tells us a story and we're like, oh, geez, that sounds awful. That makes my heart hurt. That makes so much sense. You're upset. If we can do that more for ourselves, even in that simple way, it makes sense. It makes sense I'm being more self-critical. It makes sense I'm feeling vulnerable. I do think, especially with the hormonal stuff, because it is such an art, not a science, to say like, this is scary. No wonder I feel, unsettled or ungrounded or more self-critical. I do think that's a really important, I would say like whatever tools we may not feel we have access to, when at the end of the day, we do always have compassion. If we can really cultivate that practice, even in that really simple way, it makes sense. I feel fill in the blank.
I love that. And I think that self-validation process is so important because I mean, I know for myself, like I'm my harshest critic, like I mean, I've really changed that though. Like I'm so much more like accepting and compassionate, but I used to be really hard on myself. Um, and being able to like sort of even just recognize that, like, wow, you can be really hard on yourself sometimes, and just kind of soften it so that you're
then you're
like
starting
on
to
the
notice
journey with yourself,
which is our last muscle. So well done. It's actually the first muscle, but it's the mindful awareness. And I think it is good to talk about in terms of body image because it's the same thing, exactly what you just said, which is like, wow, my body image is really loud today. That's important for me to notice. Or my body image really changed today. So starting to notice without the attitude, right? Because I have clients come in all the time. They're like, oh my God, I, hated myself. I hated what I was wearing. I felt so ugly. Even to get them to like, wow, my body image was really intense today. It felt like it was just screaming at me. That's really different. And like you said, there is something empowering about that. And sort of even having a little bit more space between what's happening and our awareness of what's happening is a big deal and can be a really great starting point.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. I feel like we covered everything.
We good. I'm so glad we got to some good stuff.
Yeah, we did. And
I love talking to clinicians. It's
I
so
love
fun.
this topic. When, you guys approached me about this conversation, I was like, yes, it's so important. It really is. And I think that if we can become more aware of these, this inner dialogue that we have and just really becoming more aware of how we are on the journey with ourselves, that includes our body in such a big way. Like we would have such an easier existence.
Totally. So. And really, again, the more, rather than seeing body image as this like thing you got to wrangle, if we see it as an indicator, just like we get eczema or headaches or, cry around certain people, or the more that we can start to see it as a flag. I would say it's like an indicator light on your car. It might just be windshield wiper fluid, but it could also be, something really big that we're kind of not fully aware that is affecting us. The more we do that, the more connected we are to ourselves.
Yeah.
So rather than
relationship that we're having.
Yeah. Exactly.
So tell people where they can find your book.
Yeah. So anywhere there are books, certainly Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those good places. And then, many bookstores have it. And if not, they can certainly order it. It's Hachette UK, but it's available anywhere in the States. Amazon's the easiest place. And Sheldon Press is the imprint of Hachette. So you can find us there. On Instagram, we are Body Image Inside Out. We just did a big post today. Actually, it's Eating Disorder Awareness Week. So we did a big post with a little bit about our stories and how this whole dialogue came to be. And what else? And then our website is bodyimageInsideOut.com.
And you said you do group work. Is there any?
Yep. So individually as a clinician, I see people individually. and do group work. And I'm actually hoping to start a body image group, actually. It'll probably be in person, so it would need to be folks here. I have a couple that are virtual, a couple that are in person. So Whitney and I are doing a clinician training in June here in Boston for RDs, physical therapists, obviously mental health therapists, psychologists, social workers. And then next fall, we're going to do a big body image workshop for whoever wants to come. So,
Awesome.
And we will be doing more virtual stuff as well. You can check all that out on our website. We have all of our upcoming events.
Awesome. I love what you're doing. It's so important.
Oh, thanks.
I will
Thank you
put
for
all of
loving
that
it.
in. Yeah, no, I mean, I just totally celebrate you.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you for being here with me today. And
totally my pleasure. Thank you for sharing a little bit about your story and your kiddos and your journey.
And yeah, for my listeners, thank you for joining. And I will see you again on All the Things. Thanks for joining me for this episode of All the Things.